musicianship. Never done it before, and it just sounds like you've done it 100 times. Now we're talking impressive. That's amazing. In the presence of greatness. Ernest Holmes says, "My mind is open to new ideas. The Spirit is ever active in me." My mind is open to new ideas. The Spirit is ever active in me. The divine mind is inexhaustible. The divine mind is inexhaustible. There is no weary or monotonous action in spirit. There is no weary or monotonous action in spirit. It is forever new and vibrant, fresh with ideas. It is never, ever new and vibrant, fresh with ideas. I know that I am continuously receiving new impressions from life, new, better, and fuller ways of living. I know that I am continuously receiving new impressions from life, new, better, and fuller ways of living. I let the newness, freshness, and originality of spirit permeate my entire consciousness. I let the newness, freshness, and originality of spirit permeate my entire consciousness. Just even the words are refreshing, aren't they? It's like a cool, bubbling spring on a hot summer's day. I let the newness, freshness, and originality of spirit permeate my entire consciousness. Ask again, when was the last time that we did that? We've done that. When was the last time that we actually thought and contemplated a new original idea about our lives? I've been thinking about that a lot this week, and what it means to be in the newness and what it means to accept our good. There's a fundamental statement from Emma Curtis Hopkins wherein she says, there is a good for you and you ought to have it. There's a good for you and you ought to have it. Born from this place of understanding her relationship with life. And for those of you that aren't aware, Emma Curtis Hopkins is one of the godmothers of the New Thought movement, fundamental in teaching Ernest Holmes and his insight and wisdom, a student. She's called the teacher of teachers. Taught so many people about new thought and new insight and new awareness. This new that Ernest Holmes talks about. This, I love how he presents this. Why not disrobe this mental darkness with the glorious conception of the new light, now known to exist? Back when these ideas were written, and back at the turn of the other century, the turn of the previous century, right? When I was going through the school of ministry and studying, we talked about the turn of the century, and the turn of this last one hadn't happened yet. So around the turn of 1800s to 1900s, there was a revolution of thought happening. There was a revolution of light taking place. There was this group of, kind of this, at some point we'll do a history of new thought. That kind of stuff bores me, actually. It's good to understand where things come from, though, as well. There was Trollard and Antoine Mesmer and some other people that were practicing and doing some things, experimenting with thought over in Europe. And it is actually fascinating in some way when I really get down to it, right? I can be bored with it, too. All right, both can happen simultaneously. Talked about paradox a few weeks ago, right? But there was this movement happening of people starting to ask questions, and that's where it happens, is when we start asking questions about how the status quo has just been, right? So we have these avatars that come along from time to time, like a Jesus, like the people that we hear about so often. And they revolutionize the idea about what it is to be alive, and our connection to life, and our connection to the Spirit. Jesus was probably the most widely known one of those in modern-ish times, whatever you want to call it. But then we're talking about going back thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and which, I've talked a lot about Paramahansa Yogananda. If we want to go back even further, like the beginning of where his teachings come from and the lineage of it, we're talking thousands of years that people have had an insight about life and our relationship to it. And that we're not just, trudging along, that we're actually, that the insight is, the inward sight is, where we come from is this inexhaustible possibility that many of us call God, the first principle, first cause, oneness, etc., love, life with a capital L, all of those things. But we don't spend enough time courting that relationship. That we're just kind of entertained by a book. That sometimes we even read a book like this and we read it more like a novel than a charge. More like a novel than an invitation. More like entertainment than what's actually really possible for my life. So for thousands of years, people have come along and have said, this is what's possible. And then a few said, oh, that's what's possible. And begin to practice something. Whereas the vast majority, we can look at the world now, whereas the vast majority of people, humanity, are just trudging along, getting through this human existence. And I spoke about this a little bit last week too. That there's the work week, right? And we just do the work week over and over and over again. There's a day, and we just do the same day over and over and over again. Even people that are studied in this, even people that have taken time to really seek to digest and metabolize, but there's still this kind of morbidity of existence. Being a human being's hard. It just really is, man. It's difficult. And woman, it's hard. But we have guides. We have these individuals that present possibilities. So even when I come up with a topic like something is big enough to drive a semi through is go get your good, what does that even mean? What is good anyway? And of course we know that my good isn't your good and your good isn't my good. But there is a good for us, and we ought to have it, I think, fundamentally is what we're talking about. And what is solution? And what is possibility? And how do we extend and expand that from where we are right now into not an addiction to more, because many of us are familiar with that as well. More money, more love, more partners, more relationship, more whatever. Insert your more here. But an acceptance of the good that is possible and to create a relationship with it, not so it's I need more of this thing in order to feel alive, but I'm accepting the good that is at hand, and then by the very nature of that acceptance and gratitude, it draws unto itself. You know what I'm saying? Are you with me, generally speaking? This whole thing, like when I jump like this on a Sunday morning, when I'm feeling like an inspiration, it's not just to like try and entertain, but it's like the insight strikes me once again of the possibility that lays before any one of us. And it's not meant to be significant or insignificant. And if we look at principle, there's no place to get to. Like there's no destination on this spiritual path. You're not going to get anywhere. Consider it. There's nowhere to get to. If we live in an infinite and we live in unlimited possibility, what's the destination? That's the only thing that's possible is the I amness, is I aming. And so when we start to consider your good and having it, I mean, you can achieve your good and then your good just isn't enough anyway. And so there's something else that we seek to obtain or seek to attain. But when we can get to that point of realizing that we live in an unlimited possibility, that we live in an infinite idea, that we live in a universal presence, and continue to remove ourselves from the gravitational pull of the idea of a God that lords over us, and even a lot of people in New Thought still submit to that somehow, that there's a God that is pulling the strings. Even the idea of divine intervention would speak to that. That somehow God all of a sudden intervened in my life, but nothing happened to God. God didn't change. All of a sudden my mind was open to a greater possibility. That's divine intervention. That something happened inside of me where all of a sudden I was willing to have a greater experience of life. Where I was willing to have a greater insight somehow, and it could be that life just beats you down to the point where you're on your knees and you're like, I don't know what to do, and that's the moment. It could be that you're trudging and just trying to get by, and you feel impatient. All of a sudden, you just feel worn down by your impatience. You're like, oh, I need something to happen. And something happens. It could be that you're just steadily on this road of harvesting a greater insight about life, and welcoming a greater idea about yourself, and then some small thing happens. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and he said he was having this internal conflict about his mom, right? And how his mom and his family lineage was the purveyor of abuse, the matriarch of abuse in this family structure. And so I know what I do when I'm faced with somebody that's abusing me is I generally want to get away as far as possible. When I get even a little sense of what abuse really means and the cycle of abuse and being in it, there's the cycle of abuse that says I have to stay in it, and we're just unconscious to it, and then we stay and we allow that cycle of abuse to happen. And when we get just a little bit of insight about ourselves, there's that thing that says, I got to get out of this. This is killing me. It's crushing me. It's like we realize that we're just beaten down by it. So he was saying at some point out of nowhere, and this is where out of the blue, and for those of you that do colors, blue means spirit, grape, I was going to say grape, purple means unconditional love, grape means unconditional, scratch and sniff of life, grape. So blue means spirit, out of the blue. It just happened to be out of the blue. Well, blue's the spirit. And so he was saying, out of the blue, I had this insight, and he made a point of living across the country from his mom, right? Because she was the matriarch of abuse in this cycle, in this family. Out of the blue, out of nowhere, there was this movement of, okay, on Wednesday, this was on a Sunday, he said, on Wednesday, you're going to fly to XYZ, and you're going to go sit with your mom. At this point, she was on the death process. And he didn't know a thing about it. All he knew was it was on Wednesday he was going to fly to spend some time with his mom. And he did that. And there wasn't some intense, like, F you, mom, all this stuff, and I got to get clean, and da-da-da-da-da. It was just being there. And seeing that his mom had dry lips. She was kind of, going through that process of, not being able to take care of herself. And so her lips were dry. So he went and gave her some water. He went and, the sponges that they have, and wet her lips a little bit, and she loved it, and she welcomed it. And then there was another time where she wanted to, she was feeling better. He, put her in a wheelchair and wheeled her outside, and doing some things like this. And there wasn't any big significant moment. There wasn't any healing moment. There was just being in the process of it. And every day he had no idea why he was there, except to be there. And that was it. And it transformed his life. And that was his good. He didn't know why. He was just being in the moment. He was just listening. He listened. And then that out of the blue moment happened, that something happened where he wasn't feeling beaten down. He felt pretty surrendered in his life. And I'm obviously filling in a bunch of blanks here. He felt pretty complete in the relationship. But something happened in that moment. On Wednesday, fly over there. And then it ended up being this few weeks of this time. It wasn't intended to be healing time. It wasn't intended to be time to get complete. It was just intended to listen and to follow instructions and to be there and to participate in life. That's listening. That's following our good. There's a good for him in that moment, and he ought to have it. And that was his good, to just listen and participate. But if we're stuck in the life that we have, we can't listen. We won't listen. We don't listen. When we're stuck in this is the way life is, we don't have a chance because we're in a paradigm. Everybody knows what paradigm is, yeah? A paradigm. It's all you can see. It's what you see. There's this saying, out of sight, out of mind. Out of mind, out of sight. If it's not something that you're participating with in your mind, you will not see it. Science shows this. That if it is not something that you can conceive and perceive in your own mind, you will not see it. How many times, Barry, how many times am I trying to find something in the house and I just don't find it? And she's like, there it is. It's embarrassing. Out of mind, out of sight. It's consider it for a moment. So when Ernest Holmes says that we're to, when he says that we're to Bear with me just a second. Form patterns in mind which automatically reproduce themselves. How do we form patterns in mind? Well, we get exposed to ideas. We get exposed to good ideas. And as much as I like hear myself preach too, it's just being exposed to ideas. We're being exposed to something. Why we'd want to, we could expose ourselves to the stuff that I might call garbage. One person's trash is another person's treasure. But then we see it everywhere we go. Like, I don't see all these things that people talk about and they're like on social media and all these things. Like, I don't see it in the world. I don't. And I'm not saying I don't see it because I choose not to see it. I see it because I don't see it. I'm not trying to be profound here. You know what I'm saying? All these people that are so mean and they walk into a place and they're like, I hate life and I hate you. And I'm like, where is this happening? By whatever reason. But I also know that I choose to cultivate things that are life-giving, to see things that serve, to build love and relationships that are filled with joy. I choose to do that. I choose to, there's this part in the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. There's this paragraph, and I can't remember where it is, but it says, sometimes if you're helping another alcoholic, you might need to fight, and you might need to, surrender your entire life basically to help that person get to where they need to get to. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to fight with anybody. I'm not going to expose my daughter to weird crap. It's a paradigm that we're choosing to live in, a paradigm. I know that was kind of just this out of nowhere something I just said, but there's a point to it, and I think you're getting it. It fits in the context. There's a good for you and you ought to have it. Go get your good. Be willing to entertain a new idea about your life. This thing's called new thought. You understand that, right? This whole movement of unity churches and religious science and divine science, and it's called new thought for a reason. New thought. When was the last time anybody in here had a new thought? A different thought? Just consider for yourself like a different thought about your life, a different way to do something. There's a poem that Ernest Holmes wrote in the Science of Mind. It's from page 512 if you want to go home and look at it yourself. It's called, O Soul of Mine, Look Out and See. O soul of mine, look out and see. Look up and know thy freedom. He's talking to his soul. He's talking from his soul to his soul. Look up and know thy freedom. Be not cast down or dismayed. Be uplifted within me and exult, for thy salvation has come, is come already now. Behold the wonders of the great whole, and the marvels of the universe. Look out and see thy good. Look out and see thy good. It is not afar off, but is at hand. Prepare thyself to accept and believe, to know and to live. Let life enter and live through thee. Soul of mine, and rejoice that thou hast vision so fair and so complete. Rejoice that the perfect whole is so completely reflected through thee. My light has come. Page 512 in the Science of Mind. Go get your good. Like, for real, you know what I mean? Like, your good isn't going to just come to you. This magical thinking of, I'm just going to pray and, the Brinks truck is going to back up into my front yard. Anybody had that happen? How do you go get it? You got to go get your good. Here's a few things. You got to experiment and explore. Experiment with your life. Is anybody too far along in life that they're afraid to experiment a little bit? I mean, what could you experiment with? I don't know if you're single and then not in a relationship, it's like, okay, the right way to do things is only to date one person at a time. Well, what if you dated 3 people at the same time? Oh, shut your mouth, Charles. Shut it. You shut your mouth. What if you tried a different kind of ice cream? I don't know. Experiment and explore. Is anybody too far along to experiment and explore in your life? Go get your good. Like, figure it out. Be willing to reinvent yourself. You know that musical artists, the ones that have long careers, each album they reinvent their style? Yeah, I know it's true. Thank you, Peggy. It's true. You look at like back in the day, the Madonnas. Who is it now? It's Taylor Swift. You know what I mean? And she has the Eras tour. And it's all the records that she's put together. And she's bigger than God at this point. She is God at this point, They reinvent themselves with each album, and that's how they have longevity. One of my favorite groups of all time only really put out 2 albums because they kept creating the same music over and over again. Anybody familiar with the group Boston? Profound. These musicians were genius. They built their own organ. They built their own sounds. They built their own guitar sounds, their own amplifiers, so it would be a particular sound. You won't go listen to a Boston album. You will not hear those sounds anywhere else in the music world. Anywhere. It's unique. It's original. But they took those things they built and they kept making the same music. Brad Delp, rest his soul, wherever he's dancing right now, he could be in this room empowering me along. One of the most profound voices ever. Go listen to him. It's fascinating. But they kept making the same music. Be willing to reinvent yourself, to experiment and to explore, and many things could fall flat. I mean, I've had a lot of business ideas. I'm mowing down. I'm like, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. Let's go get some business cards made. Yeah, I've got 3-4 different business cards in my office right now from different incarnations of business ideas. At some point, it's like, let's have some fun. Let's experiment. What can you experiment with? A new hobby, right? What's your good? Go get your good. You might not even know what your good is anymore. This is good. Walter's good. What else is good? Not like as a husband or a different, but like, what else is possible? What else is possible? And to ask yourself that. To be willing to change your mind and change your heart, to be willing to redefine yourself. Is anybody in here too far along to do that? To not do that? Nobody in here is too far along to do that. Even this community, this center, it's different than what it's looked like probably ever. And is it going to work? Is it going to happen? It is working. But is it going to look like maybe the way some of us want it to look like? I don't know. Will we pivot along the way and try different things? Probably. Am I a different energy that's been in here? Even, Bernardo he's more meditative, contemplative, kind of, powerful presence. You go through, it's different now. And this center that's been around for 56 years, coming up on 60, it's different. Is it going to work? I mean, I don't know. And what does that even mean? Is it working right now? You're damn right it is. Because here we are, and something is happening because of this morning. Somebody's willing to entertain life in a new and different way. The possibility of it. So, what's your good? What is your good? And I love, the only way we're going to find out is by living in the experiment of it. And the only way we're going to be willing to live in the experiment of it is to get uncomfortable. So get uncomfortable. Let's get uncomfortable. I know what my comfort line is. I would like for you this week to explore what your comfort line is. And maybe just to, as I've said before, dip your toes over it or jump over it. When we have community to catch us, most of us, we know somebody. We have relationships. We have each other. Somebody is there to support you. Somebody's there to empower you. Somebody's there with you, to encourage you, to experiment a little bit, right? Experiment just a little bit. We've all, at some point in our life, we've all experimented with whatever we've experimented with over the course of being a human being. We get on a little bit, we're like, oh, now I've kind of discovered who I am. This is what my preferences are. And that's good and beautiful, but how about expanding the pot of preference as well? And maybe it's time to release some things. That same guy, I'll wrap up with this. That same guy, his mom on her deathbed, she was out of it, and then woke up at one point and said, I should have never married your father. That's fascinating, right? Like, what would it be if we follow our heart? You know, like, of course, the kids might not have been there and that kind of stuff, but that to me, it's funny and not funny all at the same time. Should have never married your father. It's entertaining. It's like, yeah, she just made a statement of truth, right? Like, if she would have followed her heart a long time ago, like, do we want to get 20 years down the road and say, if I would have followed my heart when? On September 15th, 2024. If I would have started following my heart when? If I would have made the decision I really want to make on September 15th, 2024, life would have been better. But now I'm on my deathbed. I should have asked that guy out. I should have invested in. I should have not been with the should crowd and followed the sea of shoulds and taken that trip that's on the bucket list. You know what I mean? Like, you're the Lord of your own life. And sometimes to come to that, it takes a tremendous amount of upheaval. But we're the Lord of our own lives, and the miracle happened a long time ago. Did somebody push that back down to 68? Brad Delp did, because I put it up on 70. You with me? That's all. I'm done. I'm done. Done. That's it. Let's pray together for a moment, shall we? Let's take a deep breath. In concert with the presence and power and the love of the Spirit, we welcome a new idea about our lives. Knowing that long ago the miracle already happened. Long ago the miracle happened. And the miracle is that the first cause, the presence, the power, the love, breathed life into itself and created life out of the only thing that it could, its own fabric, its own being, its own nature. And from that came I am. And from that came Charles. And from that came each of us that sit in this room. And from that came a community of individuals, earnest and sincere in growing. This Santa Fe Center for Spiritual Living came a community of people that became one, that said, we're interested in knowing ourselves. We're interested in being free. And then we make it up as we go. Nobody's got this thing figured out. I don't care how much confidence they say it with. It is a day-to-day thing, baby. Moment by moment. Turning our attention inward, catching another idea about ourselves, breathing into it and saying, help me grow. I want to grow. I want to know who I am truly, fully. So I bless each one of us in this room. I know that whatever we're experiencing in life, that there is a good to meet that. The desires of our hearts, where something feels missing, where there feels like a longing, where there feels like a pain. There's a good. That there's an antidote, if you want to call it that way, that there's a solution, an answer. And it will only present itself to each one of us uniquely. Grateful for the time that we shared together this morning. I know that each of us have welcomed something, and that life is different and better because of it. I recognize it as good. I call it good, and so it is.